When one looks at Hume from the standpoint of our time, I think one is very struck by the sort of modernity, from our point of view, of very much of it. I mean, he was centrally concerned with this problem of the self. Well, some of the best philosophy that's been done in Britain in recent years has been about problems of the self. Scientists in the 20th century have been deeply puzzled, especially in their thinking about quantum physics, about the presence or absence of causal connection. And only yesterday, so to speak, the logical positivists, or at least the chief representative of logical positivism in the English-speaking world, A.J. Ayer, were constantly talking about how much they owed to Hume and how almost everything they'd say. Ayer is constantly saying that almost everything he has to say has previously been said by Hume. One comes up against this modernity to us again and again. And one of the 20th century problems of philosophy that he is credited with having formulated for the first time is the famous problem of induction, isn't it? That is to say that the logical basis on which scientific theories were traditionally said to rest. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, it's very closely related to what I said previously about causality. Go back to my baby that's dropping this ball out of the... Well, I suppose it does this on Monday, and it does it on Tuesday, and it does it on Wednesday, and it does it on Thursday. Every time it drops the ball bounces. Then certainly Hume would say it comes to believe that whenever it drops the ball will bounce. It comes to expect the ball to bounce whenever it drops it. But suppose we ask why, since all that has happened is the same thing has occurred on many occasions. But we all know quite well that things can occur on many occasions, and then on some occasion they don't occur anymore. There's a change in the way things happen. You've been accustomed to relying on these regularities, but the regularity breaks down. Now, all Hume is saying is we can never be quite sure that this won't happen in respect to any regularity whatsoever. There's no way of arguing from the premises that things have happened in a certain way on very many occasions in the past to the conclusion that they're bound to happen in exactly the same way in the future.
And of course the point here is that every scientific law is an unrestrictedly general statement which is said to rest on a number of particular observations or experiments or instances, and the logical link can't be made. There's a marvelous example of this in the history of philosophy itself. In logic books, in some logic books in the Middle Ages, one sentence that was used as an example was, all swans are white. And of course, for literally thousands of years, every swan that any Western man had ever seen was white. And there must have been millions of instances of white swans and not a single counterexample. But in the 18th century, when Western man discovered your country, Australia, for the first time, Europeans saw black swans. And it's a marvelous illustration of the fact that however many thousands or millions of times a particular thing has been observed and found to be so-and-so, it does not follow from that that the next one will be. And therefore, and this is the logically important point, no finite number of specific observations can ever logically entail an unrestrictedly general or universal conclusion. But all scientific laws are of that character, and therefore they are not logically entailed by the observations that are supposed to be their basis. And this is an explosive insight, isn't it? I mean, it seemed to people to knock away the foundations of science as they understood it.
Yes, I think it's more and more widely agreed by scientists themselves that scientific propositions are in some measure hypothetical. And many very firmly based ones have been overthrown in the past. People used to say that Einstein didn't overthrow Newton. He simply produced a more general theory of which Newton's theory is part. But that's not really true. There are some things that Newton said that have now been shown to be false. And Newton was, for a long time, the supreme example of a kind of certain demonstrative science.
Bertrand Russell, in his famous book, A History of Western Philosophy, after he's said something about Hume's doctrines on these various fundamental things that we've considered, the cause and effect relationship, the nature of the self, the inductive basis for scientific laws, Russell then goes on to say that in many of these respects we still haven't got beyond Hume, that he pointed out very fundamental problems that no one has yet solved.
This is true. Of course, it's equally true that Plato pointed out very fundamental questions that nobody has yet solved. It's unfortunately, it's much easier in philosophy to ask questions and to raise difficulties than to produce solutions. But I think one crucial thing about Hume is the questions he asked, and I think this is also true of Plato, were very fundamental ones, so that we can say that if a person doesn't take Hume's question seriously, he can't really be counted as a philosopher.
Yes, these are absolutely fundamental to what philosophy is, aren't they?
Yes,
these
they are
questions.
fundamental issues. They're not the only issues which are fundamental, but they are fundamental issues.
What sort of a man was he? I get the impression when I read his work, and I've been rereading it for this discussion just recently, I get the impression of a kind of massive humaneness, which is enormously attractive.
Yes, his friend Adam Smith said he came as near to perfection in these sort of respects as any human being possibly could. And biographers have explored his life in great detail. I don't think any of them have found a single example of a mean or a malicious action. He's occasionally a bit timid, well, not unnaturally. He had views about religion which were scarcely popular in the society in which he was living. He's occasionally a little bit vain, but this is a form of sin, if it is that, which I can easily forgive. But he doesn't ever act meanly or maliciously. And I'm quite sure that if there was a sort of celestial philosopher's party, a dinner party, it's David Hume I would want to sit next to. Yeah. I think in many ways Plato was the greater philosopher, but it's David Hume I would want to sit next to, and I think almost everybody else would.